I heard my husband's voice before I saw him. I want a divorce. The words drifted into the kitchen like something casual, something ordinary, as if he had just come home from work and decided to change dinner plans. For a moment, the knife in my hand hovered above the cutting board. I was slicing carrots for Stephen's dinner. My 7-year-old son was sitting at the small table nearby, carefully coloring inside the lines of a dinosaur picture. I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I listened. There was another set of footsteps in the hallway. Soft, confident heels on hardwood floors. A woman's voice followed. "Justin, are you sure this is the right house?" My husband laughed quietly. "Yes, this is it." Only then did I set the knife down. Slowly, I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and turned around. Justin stood in the doorway between the hallway and the kitchen. After 9 years of living mostly in France, he looked almost the same as the last time I had seen him. Tall, well-dressed, expensive coat. But the woman beside him did not belong in my home. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, elegant black coat, long hair perfectly styled, the kind of effortless confidence you see in magazine photos. She looked around the house like someone inspecting a hotel room. Behind them, Stephen looked up from his coloring book. "Dad," he said quietly. Justin barely glanced at him. Instead, he focused entirely on me. "I think we should talk," he said. But his tone wasn't nervous. It wasn't apologetic. It sounded like a man discussing a business decision that had already been made. I leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. "About what?" Justin stepped further into the kitchen, placing a leather suitcase beside the door as if he had already decided he belonged here again. "That," he said calmly, "is Amanda." The woman gave a polite smile. "Amanda Hayes," she said. "Nice to meet you." I didn't respond. Justin continued. "We've been living together in Paris." For a moment the room felt very quiet. Stephen looked between us. Confused, Justin spoke again. "For almost 3 years. 3 years. 3 years of phone calls where he said work was busy. 3 years of visits where he said he was exhausted from travel. 3 years where I believed every word he said." Justin clasped his hands together like a man presenting a final proposal. "I want a divorce." Stephen stopped coloring. Amanda crossed her arms slightly, watching my reaction. Justin continued speaking as if explaining something obvious. "Amanda is planning to open a startup company here in the United States. We've decided it makes sense for us to move here permanently." He gestured vaguely around the house. "I think the cleanest solution is for you to sign the divorce papers as soon as possible." He said it gently, like he was doing me a favor. "You can keep the house," he added. "And of course I'll continue to support Stephen financially." Amanda nodded approvingly. The entire conversation sounded carefully prepared. Rehearsed. Then a voice appeared behind them. "Well," finally. Justin's mother stepped into the doorway. Emily Walker looked exactly the same as she always did. Perfect posture, perfectly styled gray hair, and an expression that suggested she had been right about everything all along. She glanced at Amanda, then at me. "I told Justin years ago he deserved someone with ambition," she said coolly. Her eyes traveled across the kitchen. "This situation isn't healthy for anyone." Stephen looked down at his coloring book again. Justin watched me closely now. He was waiting. Waiting for tears. Waiting for anger. Waiting for the kind of emotional reaction he had probably imagined during the flight home from Paris. But none of that happened. Instead, I smiled. Not a dramatic smile. Just a small one. Justin frowned slightly. "What's funny?" I walked past the kitchen table and gently closed Stephen's coloring book. "Why don't you go upstairs for a few minutes?" "Sweetheart," I said softly. Stephen hesitated. "But I'll call you when dinner's ready." He looked at Justin uncertainly, then slowly headed toward the stairs. The house became quiet again once he disappeared down the hallway. Justin crossed his arms. "Well," I gestured toward the living room. "Why don't we sit down first?" Amanda exchanged a glance with Justin. Justin sighed impatiently, but picked up his suitcase and walked into the living room anyway. Amanda followed. Emily took the armchair like she owned the place. Justin sat on the couch, leaning forward slightly. "Look, Natalie," he said, "I know this isn't easy, but dragging things out will only make it worse." Amanda nodded again, her expression sympathetic but distant. I remained standing for a moment. Then I walked to the small cabinet beside the bookshelf. Inside was a folder. Just a plain folder. Nothing dramatic. Nothing threatening. Justin watched curiously as I carried it over to the coffee table. "Before we talk about divorce," I said calmly, "there's something you should probably see." Justin frowned. "What is it?" I placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were printed documents, bank statements, transfer records, investment agreements. Amanda leaned forward slightly. Justin reached out and picked up the first page. For several seconds, he read silently. Then his eyebrows pulled together. "What is this?" I sat down across from him. My smile hadn't disappeared, because Justin still believed tonight was the moment everything began. But the truth was much simpler. Tonight wasn't the beginning. Tonight was the end. And he had no idea how long I had been waiting for it. Justin stared at the first page for several seconds before speaking again. "What is this supposed to be?" His voice still carried the calm confidence he had walked into the house with. Amanda leaned forward slightly beside him, her curiosity obvious now. Emily adjusted her posture in the armchair, watching everything like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched Justin's eyes move slowly across the page. Then he turned to the second document, then the third. The room grew quieter with each passing second. Amanda finally spoke. "Justin, what is it?" He didn't answer her right away. Instead, he flipped to another page. "This doesn't make sense." His voice was softer now. "What doesn't make sense?" Amanda asked again. Justin lifted one of the documents slightly. "These are bank records." "Yes?" I said calmly. Justin looked up at me. "Why do you have my bank records?" "Our bank records," I corrected. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back slightly in the chair. "For the past 3 years," I said, "money has been leaving our joint account." Justin's expression hardened. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when the first transfer was $200,000. Amanda's head snapped toward him. Justin's jaw tightened. "Those were investments." "Were they?" I asked. He turned another page. The numbers were highlighted in neat rows. Dates. Amounts. International transfer codes. Amanda shifted slightly on the couch. "You told me those were business funds," she said quietly. Justin ignored her. Instead, he focused entirely on me now. "How did you get these?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I asked the bank." Justin let out a short laugh. "You think the bank just gives out records like this?" "No," I said. "They give them to the account holder." Emily leaned forward slightly. "What exactly are you accusing Justin of?" I glanced at her. "I'm not accusing anyone." I pointed gently to the documents. "I'm just looking at numbers." Justin flipped to another page. More highlighted lines. The total at the bottom of the sheet. His eyes paused there. Then he looked up sharply. "This number is wrong." "Is it?" He tapped the page with his finger. "This says nearly $2 million. Amanda's breathing became slightly uneven. "You said the investments were under $1 million, she whispered to him. Justin didn't respond. He turned to another page. Then another. Every sheet showed the same pattern. Large transfers. European banks. Private business accounts. Justin's confidence began to slip. These were legal investments. "Maybe," I said. "But they weren't legal marital decisions." Emily crossed her arms. "Justin is allowed to invest his own money." I nodded. "Yes?" Then I pointed at another page. "But not Stephen's." Justin froze. Amanda looked confused. "What do you mean?" I slid a document across the table. Justin grabbed it quickly. His face changed immediately. "This is the education fund." I finished. "The account we had opened 7 years ago." The one meant for Stephen's college someday. Justin's voice dropped. You had no right to check that account. I had every right. Amanda stared at the page now. You told me that fund wasn't being used yet, she said slowly. Justin stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. His voice was louder now. You're acting like I stole something. I remained calm. I'm acting like I noticed something. Amanda looked between us. What exactly is she saying? Justin ran a hand through his hair. Nothing. I spoke before he could continue. I'm saying that the money funding your startup didn't come from Justin's personal wealth. Amanda's expression shifted slightly. What are you implying? I met her eyes. I'm saying it came from our family. Justin slammed the folder closed. That's enough. He stood up fully now. This conversation is over. Amanda stood up with him. But I didn't move. Actually, I said quietly, we're just getting started. Justin stopped halfway to the door. He turned slowly. What does that mean? I reached for another sheet inside the folder. This one wasn't a bank statement. It was a report. Justin recognized the logo immediately. His expression changed again. That's a law firm. Yes. Amanda frowned. You hired a lawyer. I nodded. 3 months ago. Justin stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You hired a lawyer before tonight. Yes. Why? I answered calmly. Because I already knew about Amanda. Amanda's eyes widened slightly. Justin went completely still. Emily leaned forward. What are you talking about? I pulled another page from the folder. A photograph. Not dramatic. Just a simple image printed on paper. Justin and Amanda sitting together at a cafe in Paris. His hand resting on hers. The date stamped in the corner. Justin's face turned pale. You had someone following us. I had someone confirming the truth. Amanda looked at Justin now. Her voice suddenly sharp. You told me she didn't know. Justin didn't answer. The silence in the room stretched longer now. Because everything he had planned for tonight had already collapsed. He thought he was revealing a secret. But the secret had been uncovered months ago. Justin finally spoke again. How long? Since the first transfer, I said. Amanda slowly sat back down. Emily looked stunned. Justin's voice dropped to a whisper. You've been planning something. I nodded. Yes. He stared at the folder again. At the bank statements. At the investigation report. At the photograph. Then he looked at me. What exactly are you planning? Natalie. I smiled again. The same quiet smile from before. And for the first time that evening, Justin looked afraid. Because the truth was simple. The divorce he wanted was already happening. Just not in the way he expected. Justin stared at me as if he had never seen me before. You've been planning something. The words came out slowly. Like he was testing them. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up another page from the folder and placed it on the coffee table. This is where the money went. Justin glanced down. Amanda leaned closer. Emily remained silent in the armchair. Her attention sharper now. The page showed a company name. An address in Paris. A series of financial transfers. Amanda's eyes narrowed. That's my company. Yes, I said calmly. Justin immediately stepped forward. Those were investments. Maybe, I replied. But they were still made with our family's money. Amanda crossed her arms. That's not illegal. No, I agreed. But hiding it from your wife usually becomes a problem later. Justin's patience was slipping. You went through all this just to spy on us. No, I said quietly. I went through all this because the numbers didn't make sense. Justin laughed once. A short, forced sound. You're acting like a detective. I hired one. The room went completely still. Amanda looked at Justin. You told me she was just a sales assistant. Justin ignored her. His eyes stayed fixed on me. You hired a private investigator? Yes. Why? Because $200,000 disappearing from a joint account raises questions. Emily finally spoke. You should have talked to your husband. I met her gaze. I tried. Justin shifted uncomfortably. That was business money. Then why did it come from our account? Justin opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Amanda leaned forward, her voice suddenly sharper. You said those funds came from your corporate bonus. Justin didn't look at her. They did. I slid another document across the table. This is the bonus statement from your company. Justin grabbed the page immediately. His jaw tightened as he read it. Amanda leaned over his shoulder. Her expression slowly changed. This bonus is only $300,000. Justin didn't respond. Amanda looked at him again. You told me it was almost $1 million. Justin finally snapped. It was spread across multiple payments. Amanda stepped back slightly. You never said that. Emily stood up now. This is ridiculous, she said firmly. Justin is successful. Of course he invests money. I nodded politely. Yes. Then I opened another section of the folder. But the investigator found something else. Justin froze. What investigator? The one who spent the last 3 months in Paris. Amanda's face lost some color. Justin stared at me. You sent someone to Paris? Yes. Why? Because I wanted to see the life you were living. The investigator's report was only 5 pages. But each page told a very clear story. Justin and Amanda leaving the same apartment building. Justin transferring money into Amanda's company accounts. Amanda introducing Justin to investors as her partner. Justin grabbed the report quickly. You had no right to invade my privacy. I tilted my head slightly. You invaded our marriage. Amanda took a step backward. This is insane. Justin turned toward her. Relax. But his voice didn't sound confident anymore. Amanda pointed at the documents. Your wife has financial records, investigation reports, and photographs. Her tone hardened. You told me she was clueless. Justin didn't respond, because the evidence was sitting right in front of him. Emily rubbed her temples. I cannot believe this is happening in my son's house. I corrected her quietly. My house? Emily glared at me. Justin dropped the investigator report back onto the table. Fine. He spread his hands. Yes. I invested in Amanda's company. Yes. We've been living together. He looked directly at me now. But none of that changes the fact that our marriage is over. Amanda nodded again. That's right. Justin continued. So the best thing for everyone is to sign the divorce papers and move on. His confidence was trying to return. But it sounded weaker now, because the power in the room had shifted. Justin believed he was delivering shocking news tonight. Instead, he was slowly discovering that every secret he had kept was already documented. I closed the folder calmly. Actually, I said, the divorce papers are already prepared. Justin blinked. What? They've been ready for weeks. Amanda frowned. You prepared divorce papers before tonight. Yes. Justin stared at me. You were planning to divorce me first. No. I shook my head. I was preparing for the truth. Emily looked confused. What truth? I tapped the folder again. The truth about where the money went. Justin sighed impatiently. You keep repeating that. Yes. Because the story isn't finished yet. Amanda narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? I slid the final document from the folder. This one was different. It wasn't a bank record. It wasn't an investigator's report. It was a financial analysis. Prepared by my lawyer. Justin read the first line. Then his face changed. That's impossible. Amanda leaned closer. What is it? Justin didn't answer. I did. Your company. Amanda. I folded my hands again. The one Justin invested nearly $2 million into. Amanda waited. I watched her expression carefully. According to the financial records, I continued calmly. It's already bankrupt. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had happened so far. Amanda turned slowly toward Justin. You told me the company valuation was rising. Justin looked completely stunned. Amanda's voice dropped. You told me investors were lining up. Justin stared at the financial report again. Because for the first time tonight, he was realizing something even worse than his wife discovering the affair. He might not have been Amanda's partner. He might have been her investor. And possibly, her last one. Amanda stared at the financial report as if the words on the page might suddenly change. That's not possible. Her voice sounded calm at first. But there was tension behind it now. Justin was still holding the document in both hands. The confidence he had walked into the house with was gone. "This report is wrong," he said. I watched him carefully. "It came from a financial analyst my lawyer hired." Amanda shook her head immediately. "My company isn't bankrupt." She pointed at the page. "You don't even understand how startups work." Justin finally spoke again. "Natalie, you're misreading this." "I'm not," I replied. I leaned forward slightly and turned the report so the highlighted sections were easier to see. "These numbers come directly from your company filings in France." Amanda's breathing became slower. Justin looked back at the report. "This says the company has debt." "Yes. Every startup has debt. $2.3 million. Justin didn't respond immediately. Amanda crossed her arms. "That's temporary financing." "Is it?" I asked. I reached into the folder again and pulled out another document. Amanda's eyes followed the movement carefully now. "What is that?" "Your investor report." Justin frowned. "You don't have access to investor reports." "Not directly." I slid the document onto the table. "But the investigator spoke with one of your former investors." Amanda's face went pale. Justin noticed it immediately. "What investor?" Amanda spoke quickly. "That doesn't mean anything." Justin picked up the paper. His eyes moved across the page slowly. Then he stopped. The room was silent again. "What is this?" he asked. I didn't answer. Amanda tried to grab the page from him, but Justin stepped back. The document contained several email messages. Printed clearly. Amanda's name appeared at the top of each one. Justin read the first message out loud. "Looking for additional investors to stabilize operations." He stopped. Then continued reading. "Current funding partner unaware of full financial position." Amanda stepped forward quickly. "That's taken out of context." Justin looked up at her slowly. "What funding partner?" Amanda didn't answer. Justin read the next line. "Temporary support from J. Vinance, expected to continue until new investors arrive." The initials were obvious. Justin Walker. Justin's face tightened. "You told other investors I was temporary funding." Amanda shook her head. "That's not what it means." Justin held up the page. "This is your email." Amanda's voice grew sharper. "You're misunderstanding the strategy." "Strategy." Justin laughed quietly. But the sound was different this time. It wasn't confident. It was hollow. "You told me the company was expanding." "It is expanding." "You told me we were about to close a major deal." "We were..." Justin flipped to the final page. Then he froze. "What is this?" I already knew the answer. Amanda's voice came out almost instantly. "That's private." Justin read the heading. "Investor meeting summary." He looked up. "Dated last month." Amanda took a step backward. Justin continued reading. "Exploring additional funding through European partners." Then he reached the final sentence. And the room fell silent again. Because this time Justin didn't read it out loud. He simply stared at it. Amanda knew exactly what he was reading. And she knew what came next. Justin slowly lowered the page. Then he looked at her. "You met with another investor?" Amanda didn't move. Justin's voice dropped. "While I was sending you money?" Amanda tried to keep her composure. "That's how business works." Justin shook his head slowly. "No." His voice was colder now. "That's how scams work." Emily gasped softly from the armchair. Amanda's eyes flashed with anger. "I built that company with my money," Justin replied. "With our money," I corrected quietly. Justin looked at me again, then back at Amanda. "You told me we were partners." Amanda finally lost patience. "We were partners." "You told me we were building something together." "We were building something." Justin stepped closer to her. "You told me you loved me." Amanda didn't answer. The silence was louder than any response. Justin laughed again. This time the bitterness in his voice was obvious. "How many investors are there?" Amanda folded her arms again. "That's irrelevant." Justin stared at her. "How many..." Amanda said nothing. Justin's shoulders dropped slightly, because in that moment he understood the entire situation. He had left his wife. He had abandoned his son. He had transferred nearly $2 million. And he might not even be Amanda's only financial supporter. Emily spoke quietly. Justin. But he didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Amanda. You used me. Amanda's expression hardened. I gave you an opportunity. Justin shook his head again. You gave me a story. Amanda took a step toward the door. This conversation is pointless. Justin didn't stop her, because something inside him had already shifted. For the first time since he walked into the house, he looked unsure of everything. I picked up the folder slowly and closed it. Amanda noticed the movement. What are you doing? She asked. Finishing the explanation. Justin turned toward me again. What explanation? I placed the folder back on the table. The one about the divorce. Justin frowned. You already said you prepared the papers. Yes. But there's something else attached to them. Justin's eyes narrowed slightly. What? I met his gaze calmly. A financial recovery claim. Amanda froze halfway to the door. Justin looked confused. What does that mean? It means, I said quietly, the court will review every dollar that left our family account. Justin stared at me. Amanda looked suddenly nervous. Because for the first time tonight, they were both realizing something. The divorce Justin asked for wasn't going to be simple. It was going to be expensive. Justin stared at me for several seconds before speaking again. A financial recovery claim. His voice carried a mix of disbelief and irritation. Yes. I kept my tone calm. Justin shook his head slowly. You're overreacting. Amanda remained near the doorway now, watching the conversation carefully. Emily leaned forward in the armchair. What exactly is she talking about? Justin gestured toward the folder on the table. She's trying to threaten us with legal nonsense. I folded my hands in my lap. It's not a threat. Justin scoffed. Then what is it? It's the next step. Amanda's expression hardened. You're saying you're going to sue Justin? No, I said quietly. I'm saying the court will review the financial transfers. Justin laughed again. You think a divorce court cares about investments? I looked directly at him. They care about marital assets. Justin's smile faded slightly. Emily frowned. Justin used his own money. I tilted my head. Did he? Justin opened his mouth to respond, then paused. Amanda spoke instead. The funds were transferred voluntarily. Yes. I agreed. But they came from a joint account. Justin's jaw tightened again. That account had my income. And my name? The silence stretched for a moment. Amanda stepped forward again. You're trying to make this sound criminal. I'm not. Then what? Expensive. Justin rubbed his temples. This is ridiculous. Amanda crossed her arms. She's bluffing. I slid another document across the table. Justin glanced down reluctantly. What now? Legal consultation notes. Justin picked up the page. He read the first few lines quickly. Then he frowned. This says the court can recover transferred marital funds. Yes. From third parties. Amanda stiffened. What? Justin looked at the next line. If those funds were transferred without spousal consent. Emily spoke quickly. That's absurd. I looked at her calmly. It's family law. Justin dropped the paper back onto the table. You're exaggerating. Am I? I opened the folder again and pulled out a highlighted bank statement. Justin recognized the number immediately. $250,000. The largest transfer. The one sent 3 months ago. Amanda's startup account number appeared clearly beneath it. Justin's voice became quieter. You've been collecting this for months. Yes. Amanda turned toward him. You told me she didn't know anything. Justin ignored her again. Instead, he looked at me. What exactly are you planning to do? File the divorce. You said that already. Yes. But the financial claim is attached. Justin ran a hand through his hair. So what happens? The court investigates the transfers. And then, if they decide the money belonged to both spouses. I paused slightly. They can order it returned. Amanda's face changed instantly. That's impossible. Justin looked at her sharply. Why? Amanda spoke too quickly. Because the money has already been used. Justin stared at her. Used how? Amanda hesitated. Business operations. Justin frowned. You told me the company had reserve funds. Amanda didn't answer. Justin looked back at the documents on the table. Then at me. How much are you claiming? Everything. Justin laughed again. But the sound lacked confidence now. That's almost $2 million. Yes. Emily stood up abruptly. You're trying to destroy my son. I shook my head slowly. I'm trying to protect my son. Emily glared at me. This is revenge. No? I glanced toward the staircase where Stephen had disappeared earlier. This is accountability. Justin leaned forward on the couch, elbows resting on his knees. You really think a judge will take all of that seriously? Yes. Amanda spoke quietly beside him. Justin? He turned toward her. What? Amanda's voice lowered slightly. If the accounts are investigated. She stopped speaking. Justin waited. What? Amanda looked uncomfortable now. The company finances might be reviewed. Justin stared at her. Why would that matter? Amanda didn't answer immediately. Justin's eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me? Amanda looked at the floor briefly, then back at him. Some of the funds were used to cover older debts. Justin froze. What debts? Amanda's voice became tight. Investor obligations. Justin shook his head slowly. You told me those were already handled. Amanda didn't respond. Justin stood up suddenly. You said the company was stable. Amanda looked defensive now. It was supposed to be. Justin laughed again. Louder this time. You needed my money. Amanda's voice snapped back. I needed support. Justin turned away from her and looked at the documents again. Because now the situation was finally becoming clear. The money he had transferred. The investments he believed were building a future. They weren't creating something new. They were filling a hole that already existed. Justin turned back toward me slowly. You knew about this? Yes. For how long? Long enough. Amanda grabbed her purse from the chair near the door. This conversation is pointless. Justin didn't stop her this time. He was too busy staring at the bank statements. Amanda paused at the doorway. You think you've won something tonight? She said coldly. I didn't answer. She looked at Justin. You should call your lawyer. Then she left. The front door closed quietly behind her. Justin didn't move for several seconds. Then he sat down again. Emily looked stunned. Justin, tell me that woman isn't taking advantage of you. Justin didn't answer her. His eyes stayed on the documents in front of him. Then he looked at me again. You filed the divorce already. Didn't you? I nodded. Yes. Justin exhaled slowly. When? This morning? The silence that followed was heavier than anything else that had happened tonight. Because for the first time since he walked into the house, Justin realized something. He hadn't come home to end the marriage. The marriage had already ended. And the legal war had already begun. Justin stared at me like the ground had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. You filed already? The sentence sounded more like a realization than a question. Yes. The living room had become unusually quiet. Amanda was gone. The front door had closed behind her only a few minutes earlier. But the echo of her departure still seemed to hang in the air. Emily stood beside the armchair, her arms folded tightly. Justin sat on the couch with the folder open on the table in front of him. The same documents he had dismissed earlier now looked very different. When exactly did you file? He asked again. This morning. Justin let out a slow breath. You knew I was coming tonight? Yes. And you filed before I even said anything? Yes. Emily's voice cut in sharply. So this was your plan all along? I turned slightly toward her. My plan was to prepare for the truth. Justin leaned back into the couch. For the first time since he arrived. He looked exhausted. You've been planning this for months. Yes. And you never said a word. There was nothing to say. Justin ran a hand across his face. This is insane. He picked up one of the documents again. The court is going to review all of this. Yes. Justin shook his head slowly. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Am I? Justin tapped the financial report again. These are just investments. From a joint account. You keep repeating that. Because it matters. Justin suddenly stood up and began pacing across the living room. You know what this is really about? I watched him quietly. You're angry because I moved on. No. You're trying to punish me. No. Justin stopped pacing and turned toward me. Then what do you want? The truth. Justin let out a short laugh. The truth? Yes. He gestured toward the folder. You already have your truth. I shook my head slightly. No. Justin frowned. What does that mean? It means you still don't understand the situation. Emily stepped forward. What situation? I pointed calmly toward the documents. The investigation. Justin's eyes narrowed. What investigation? The one that begins when the court reviews financial transfers. Justin scoffed. You think a judge is going to waste time on this? Yes. Why? Because the transfers crossed international accounts. Justin's expression changed slightly. And because part of the money came from Stephen's education fund. Emily's voice rose immediately. Stop repeating that. Justin didn't interrupt her this time. Instead, he looked back down at the documents again. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Nearly $2 million, spread across dozens of transfers. Justin finally spoke again. Even if the court looks at it, nothing will happen. I tilted my head slightly. Why not? Because it's already done. He spread his hands. The money is gone. Exactly. Justin blinked. What? That's why the court investigates. Justin looked confused. I don't follow. They investigate where the money went. Justin frowned again. And then what? If the funds were used improperly, they can order them recovered. Justin laughed again. You think Amanda can just give it back? No. Justin crossed his arms. Then what? The court freezes accounts. The words hung in the air for a moment. Justin stared at me. Freezes accounts. Yes. Emily looked alarmed. You can't freeze someone's business. The court can. Justin looked suddenly uneasy. That only happens in criminal cases. Not always. Justin ran his hand through his hair again. You're exaggerating. I shook my head. Family courts do it all the time when marital assets are involved. Justin stopped pacing. His voice dropped slightly. So what are you saying? I'm saying the divorce isn't the biggest problem. Justin frowned. Then what is? The financial trail. Justin stared at the folder again. Then he looked toward the front door where Amanda had left. You really think this is going to affect her company? Yes. Justin rubbed his temples. This is unbelievable. Emily stepped closer to him. Justin, don't listen to her. But Justin didn't answer. Instead, he slowly sat back down on the couch. Because something was finally starting to connect in his mind. The bank statements. The investigator's report. Amanda's emails. The financial debts. And now the court case. Justin looked up at me again. When does the hearing happen? Tomorrow. Justin's head snapped up. Tomorrow? Yes. Emily gasped. You dragged my son into court in less than 24 hours. I remained calm. The court scheduled a preliminary review. Justin leaned forward again. What exactly does that mean? It means the judge will look at the financial evidence. And then the investigation begins. Justin stared at me. For the first time since he walked through the door tonight, there was real uncertainty in his eyes. You planned all of this? Yes. Justin looked down at the documents again. Then he asked the question quietly. Why didn't you just confront me months ago? I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. Because if I had confronted you, you would have hidden everything. Justin didn't respond. The silence in the room stretched again. Finally, he leaned back and let out a slow breath. So tomorrow this becomes public? Yes. Justin looked toward the dark window beside the living room. And Amanda's company? He stopped speaking. I finished the sentence for him. Will become part of the case. Justin closed his eyes briefly. Because for the first time since he walked into the house tonight, he realized something much worse than losing his marriage. By tomorrow morning, his entire life might be under investigation. Justin barely slept that night. I knew because I heard him walking through the house more than once after midnight. The hallway floor creaked near Stephen's room, then again near the kitchen. Then silence. I stayed in my bedroom with the door closed, staring at the ceiling long after the lights were off. For 9 years I had waited for Justin to come home. Now he was finally here. And somehow the house had never felt more unfamiliar. Morning arrived quietly. Stephen sat at the breakfast table eating cereal while sunlight spilled through the kitchen window. He looked at me with the same innocent expression he always had. "Is Dad staying now?" he asked. I poured coffee slowly. "Not today." Stephen nodded thoughtfully. He didn't ask any more questions. Children notice more than adults think they do. A few minutes later, Justin entered the kitchen. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes looked tired. He poured himself coffee without speaking. Then he sat across from me at the table. Stephen glanced between us. "Dad." Justin forced a small smile. "Yeah, buddy." Stephen held up his dinosaur drawing.
"Look."
Justin nodded absently. "That's great." Stephen smiled proudly and went back to coloring. Justin lowered his voice. "What time is the hearing?" 10 o'clock. Justin checked the clock on the wall. 3 hours. He stared into his coffee. "You really went through with this?" "Yes." Justin sighed. "Do you understand what this could do to my career?" "Yes." Justin shook his head slowly. "You're putting everything at risk." "I'm protecting what belongs to my son." Justin didn't answer. Instead, he stared down at the table. Finally, he spoke again. "I called Amanda last night. I waited. She says her lawyer will handle everything." "That's good." Justin looked up sharply. "You're not worried?" "No." Justin studied my face carefully. "You seem very calm about this." "I am." He leaned forward slightly. "Why?" "Because I already know what the evidence says." Justin rubbed his temples again. "You've turned this into a war." "No." "It feels like one." Justin stood up suddenly and walked toward the window. Outside, the quiet Boston street looked exactly the same as it always had. Cars passed slowly. Neighbors walked dogs. Normal life continued. Justin spoke without turning around. "I spent 9 years building my career in Paris." "I know. I worked for everything I have." "Yes." Justin turned back toward me. "And now you're trying to destroy it." I met his eyes. "You destroyed it yourself." Justin opened his mouth to argue. But then he stopped. Because deep down he understood something. The evidence in that folder was real. The transfers had happened. The accounts existed. The numbers didn't lie. Stephen looked up again. "Are you two fighting?" Justin forced another smile. "No." Stephen seemed satisfied with that answer. Justin walked back toward the table. "What exactly happens today?" "The judge reviews the case. And if they believe you, then the investigation continues." Justin frowned. "And if they don't, then nothing changes." Justin stared at me for a moment. "You're gambling everything on a judge." "No." "Then what?" "On the truth." Justin laughed quietly. "You really believe that works?" "Yes." Justin finished his coffee and placed the mug on the counter. "I'm calling my lawyer." "That's a good idea." Justin walked toward the hallway, then stopped. "Does Stephen know?" "No." Justin nodded slowly. "Good." He walked upstairs a few minutes later to make the call. Stephen finished his cereal and slid off the chair. "Can I bring my dinosaur drawing to school?" "Of course." He ran toward the hallway to grab his backpack. For a moment, the house felt almost normal again. Justin came back downstairs 20 minutes later. His face looked more serious now. "My lawyer says this is complicated." "Yes." "He says the financial transfers might become an issue." "They will." Justin looked at me. "You're not bluffing." "No." Justin sat down again. His voice lowered slightly. "If the court freezes accounts..." He stopped speaking. I didn't help him finish the sentence. Because he already knew the answer. Amanda's company would collapse. Justin leaned back in the chair. This whole thing could destroy her business. Yes. Justin shook his head again. You're ruthless. No. I stood up and grabbed my coat from the chair. I'm prepared. Justin watched me. And if the court rules against you, then life continues. Justin studied me carefully. You've changed? Maybe? Justin picked up his car keys from the table. Are you driving to court? Yes. Justin hesitated. Then he asked quietly, Can I come with you? I looked at him for a moment. That's up to you. Justin nodded once. Stephen came running back into the kitchen. Mom, the bus is here. I knelt down and helped him put on his backpack. Have a good day at school. He hugged me quickly. Then he looked at Justin. Bye, Dad. Justin forced another smile. Bye, buddy. Stephen ran out the front door toward the school bus. The house fell silent again. Justin looked at the folder still sitting on the coffee table. Then he picked it up slowly. Let's go, he said quietly. Because in less than an hour, a judge would decide whether his entire life was about to unravel. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. Justin and I walked through the front doors together, but neither of us spoke. The marble floor echoed softly beneath our steps as we entered the security line. Lawyers passed by carrying briefcases. Clerks moved quickly through the hallways. Everything felt calm and routine, which somehow made the situation feel even more surreal. Justin stood beside me while we waited for the metal detector. He checked his phone again. No messages. No calls. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. You didn't tell Amanda about the hearing time, he said quietly. I didn't need to. Justin frowned slightly. She should be here. Maybe. We walked through security and continued down the hallway toward the courtroom. Justin's lawyer was already waiting near the door. A tall man in a dark suit with a serious expression. Mr. Walker, he said, shaking Justin's hand. Then he glanced toward me briefly. You must be Natalie. Yes. He nodded politely, but quickly turned back to Justin. We need to talk. Justin stepped aside with him for a moment. Their voices stayed low, but I caught a few fragments. Financial transfers. Joint account. Possible recovery claim. Justin looked more tense with every sentence. Finally, his lawyer asked, Did you tell me everything? Justin hesitated, then nodded. The lawyer didn't look convinced. A few minutes later, the courtroom doors opened. A bailiff stepped out. Walker case. Justin and I stepped forward together. The room inside was smaller than I expected. A judge sat behind a large wooden desk reviewing documents. Several other cases had already been heard that morning. We took our seats. Justin's lawyer whispered something to him. I placed the folder of documents on the table in front of me. The judge looked up. Mr. and Mrs. Walker. Yes. Your Honor, my lawyer said from beside me. Justin's lawyer stood as well. The judge glanced through the file. This appears to be a divorce petition with a financial claim attached. Yes. My lawyer replied. The judge turned a page slowly. There are significant allegations regarding marital asset transfers. Justin shifted slightly in his chair. The judge continued reading. Nearly $2 million transferred internationally over a 3-year period. Justin's lawyer spoke quickly. Your Honor, those funds were voluntary investments made by my client. The judge raised a hand. I understand. Then she looked toward me. Mrs. Walker, are you requesting a financial investigation? Yes. The judge studied the documents again. Your filing indicates the funds originated from a joint marital account. Yes. And part of the money came from a college savings account for the minor child. Justin's lawyer stood again. That claim has not yet been verified. My lawyer slid a document forward. The bank statements verify it. The judge reviewed the page carefully. Justin sat perfectly still. The room felt very quiet. Then the judge looked up. Mr. Walker, did you transfer these funds? Justin cleared his throat. Yes. And your wife was aware of these transfers? Justin hesitated. No. The judge wrote something down. Justin's lawyer stepped forward again. These were personal investments. My lawyer responded calmly. From marital funds? The judge turned another page. These investments were directed to a company registered in Paris. Yes, Justin said. The judge adjusted her glasses. Owned by Amanda Hayes. Justin's jaw tightened. Yes. The judge looked toward the courtroom entrance. Is Ms. Hayes present today? The door opened quietly at that moment. Amanda walked in. Her expression looked controlled. But there was tension in the way she held her shoulders. She took a seat behind Justin. The judge acknowledged her briefly. Ms. Hayes, your name appears in this financial claim. Amanda nodded stiffly. My attorney is reviewing the documents. The judge returned her attention to the file. These transfers may require additional review. Justin's lawyer leaned forward. Your Honor, this is a simple divorce dispute. The judge shook her head slightly. No. She tapped the page with her pen. This involves potential misuse of marital assets. Justin's breathing became slower. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair behind him. The judge continued. When funds are transferred internationally from joint accounts without spousal consent, the court must determine the legality of those transfers. Justin's lawyer began to protest again, but the judge interrupted. I am not making a ruling today. Justin exhaled slightly, but the judge continued speaking. I am ordering a preliminary financial review. Justin looked up sharply. What does that mean? The judge answered calmly. It means the court will examine the financial trail. Justin's lawyer whispered something urgently to him. The judge added one final sentence. And if the investigation confirms improper transfer of marital assets? She paused slightly. The court may order recovery of those funds. Amanda's posture stiffened instantly. Justin looked back at her. The meaning of those words was clear. The hearing ended quickly after that. But as we stood to leave the courtroom, Justin realized something. The divorce he expected to finish quickly had just become something much bigger. A financial investigation had begun, and Amanda's company was now at the center of it. The courthouse hallway felt heavier after the hearing ended. Justin walked beside me in silence while people moved around us. Lawyers discussed other cases. Clerks carried files from room to room. But for Justin, the world seemed to shrink into the folder of documents still in his hand. His lawyer stopped near the end of the corridor. We need to talk privately, he said. Justin nodded. They stepped aside near a row of wooden benches. I remained near the window at the end of the hallway. The city outside looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Cars moved slowly through the street. People crossed intersections without noticing anything unusual. Yet somewhere behind me, Justin's entire life was beginning to shift. His lawyer spoke in a low voice. You didn't mention the education fund transfers. Justin answered quietly. I didn't think they mattered. They matter. Justin looked frustrated. They were temporary. That's not how the court sees it. Justin ran a hand through his hair. So what happens now? Now the financial review begins. Justin shook his head slowly. This is insane. The lawyer's voice grew more serious. Listen carefully. Justin waited. If the court traces those funds and determines they were marital assets... He paused. They can order recovery? Justin looked toward the courtroom door. That means Amanda's company? Yes. Justin lowered his voice. The money isn't there anymore. The lawyer studied him carefully. Where is it? Justin hesitated. Operating expenses. The lawyer exhaled slowly. That's a problem. Justin leaned back against the wall. This was supposed to be a simple divorce. It stopped being simple the moment the financial claim was filed. Justin glanced toward me across the hallway. She planned this. Yes? Justin laughed quietly. You sound impressed. I'm impressed by preparation. Justin's phone buzzed suddenly. He pulled it from his pocket. Amanda. He answered immediately. Yes. Her voice was sharp even from a distance. What did the judge say? Justin glanced toward his lawyer before answering. They're reviewing the transfers. There was silence on the line. Then Amanda spoke again. What does that mean for the company? Justin rubbed his forehead. It means they might investigate the accounts. Amanda's voice rose slightly. They can't freeze the accounts. Justin didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Amanda continued. You told me this would stay private. It was supposed to. Justin looked down the hallway again. People passed by without paying attention. I'll call you later, he said quietly. He ended the call and put the phone away. His lawyer folded his arms. She's worried. She should be. Justin sighed. This is spiraling out of control. The lawyer leaned closer. There's something else. Justin frowned. What? The court may contact your employer. Justin blinked. What? If the financial transfers are tied to corporate income or executive accounts, the company may review them. Justin stared at him. You're saying this could affect my job? I'm saying it could start an internal investigation. Justin looked stunned. That's impossible. The lawyer didn't respond immediately. Justin spoke again. My bonuses came through corporate accounts. Yes. But they were still my money. Possibly. Justin shook his head. This is ridiculous. He turned and walked down the hallway toward the exit. His lawyer followed. I stayed near the window until they reached me again. Justin stopped in front of me. His voice was lower now. This isn't over. I know. Justin glanced at the courthouse doors. You've turned my entire life into a legal investigation. No. Justin's eyes hardened. You started it. He opened the door and stepped outside. The afternoon sunlight was brighter than expected. Justin stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. Then his phone buzzed again. Another call. But this time the number looked different. Justin frowned slightly. He answered, Yes. A pause. Then his expression changed. What? He listened silently for several seconds. His shoulders stiffened. I understand, he said quietly. Then the call ended. Justin lowered the phone slowly. His lawyer looked concerned. Who was that? Justin spoke quietly. My company. The lawyer waited. Justin swallowed. They're opening an internal review. The words seemed to echo louder than anything else that had happened that day. Because this was the moment Justin finally understood the real consequences. The divorce case had started a chain reaction. The financial transfers, the investigation, the court review, and now his employer was asking questions. Justin looked toward the street where traffic moved normally. His voice was barely above a whisper. This is destroying everything. I watched him calmly. Not everything. Justin looked at me. What do you mean? I thought about Stephen waiting at school, about the quiet house, about the years that had led to this moment. Then I answered simply, It's revealing everything. Justin didn't respond. Because somewhere deep down, he knew that was true. 30 days passed faster than I expected. Life in the house slowly returned to a quiet routine. Stephen went to school every morning. I went to work, answered emails, and tried to pretend that court hearings and financial investigations weren't quietly unfolding in the background of our lives. But Justin's world was moving in the opposite direction. Every few days a new development appeared. Another request for documents. Another legal notice. Another call from lawyers. The investigation into the financial transfers was moving forward much faster than anyone expected. One afternoon my lawyer, Daniel Carter, called me. They've finished the preliminary audit, he said. And there's more than we thought. I sat down at the kitchen table slowly. What kind of more? Daniel hesitated for a moment. Your husband didn't just transfer money from the joint account. I felt a tightening in my chest. What else did he do? Some of the transfers were routed through accounts tied to his corporate bonus structure. I understood immediately why that mattered. His company noticed. Yes, and they're investigating. They already are. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Daniel continued. The company believes Justin may have used executive financial channels improperly. That means termination. Possibly. After the call ended, I sat quietly in the kitchen. Stephen was upstairs doing homework. The house felt calm. But somewhere in the city, Justin's life was unraveling piece by piece. The second court hearing arrived 2 weeks later. The courthouse looked the same as before, but the atmosphere was completely different. Justin arrived early. He looked thinner, His suit was still expensive, but something about the way he carried himself had changed. The confidence was gone. Amanda arrived a few minutes later. She didn't sit beside him. Instead, she took a seat a few rows behind. Her expression looked controlled, but her eyes moved constantly around the courtroom. Emily sat beside Justin. For the first time since this began, she looked worried. The judge entered and everyone stood. Then the case began. Walker versus Walker. The clerk announced. My lawyer stepped forward first. Your Honor, the financial review ordered during the last hearing has been completed. The judge nodded. Please proceed. Daniel placed several documents on the desk. These records confirmed that nearly $2 million were transferred from joint marital accounts into the company owned by Mrs. Amanda Hayes. The judge studied the pages carefully. Justin's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, those transfers were voluntary investments. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he slid another document forward. This is the financial report produced during the investigation. The judge read silently. Then she looked up. Mr. Walker, your employer has opened an internal compliance investigation. Justin shifted in his chair. Yes. Have you been suspended? Justin hesitated. Yes. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Amanda's head turned slowly toward him. She clearly hadn't known that detail. The judge continued reading the report. These documents also indicate that funds from the child's education account were transferred into the same investment structure. Justin's lawyer tried to object again, but the judge raised her hand. This is a financial matter the court must review. She turned to Amanda. Ms. Hayes, your company received these funds. Amanda nodded stiffly. Yes. Is the company currently profitable? Amanda hesitated. Then she answered. We're restructuring. The judge studied her for several seconds. Then she turned back to the documents. The financial report indicates the company currently holds significant debt. Amanda didn't respond. The judge continued. If these funds are determined to be marital assets, the court may require repayment. Amanda's attorney stood. That would destroy the company. The judge looked at him calmly. That is not the court's concern. Justin lowered his head slightly. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked defeated. The judge closed the report. The financial investigation will continue. She turned toward Justin again. Until the investigation is complete, this court orders a temporary freeze on accounts directly tied to the disputed transfers. Amanda's chair scraped softly against the floor. What? Her voice was louder than she intended. The judge looked at her. Any accounts receiving the disputed funds will be reviewed. Amanda's attorney whispered something urgently to her. But the damage had already been done. The court clerk noted the order. Justin looked toward Amanda. Her expression had changed completely. The confident businesswoman who had walked into my house weeks earlier was gone. In her place sat someone who had just realized her company might not survive the next few months. The hearing ended shortly after that. As people began leaving the courtroom, Justin remained seated for a moment. Emily touched his arm gently. Justin! But he didn't respond. He simply stared at the empty judge's bench. Amanda left quickly without looking at him. Her attorney followed closely behind. When Justin finally stood, he looked at me across the room. His voice was quiet. You did this. I shook my head slowly. No. Justin stared at me for another moment. Then he turned and walked out of the courtroom. And for the first time since he had walked back into my life, he looked like a man who understood exactly how much he had lost. The final hearing was scheduled for a cold Monday morning. By the time I arrived at the courthouse, the air felt heavier than usual, not because of the weather, but because everyone involved in the case already knew how this was going to end. Justin was already inside the courtroom when I walked in. He looked older than he had just a few months earlier. His shoulders slumped slightly, and the sharp confidence that once defined him had disappeared. Emily sat beside him again. This time she didn't look angry. She looked tired. Amanda arrived a few minutes later with her attorney. Her expression was controlled, but the strain in her face was impossible to hide. Her company had been struggling for weeks since the court ordered the financial review. Investors had begun pulling out. Employees had started leaving. The startup she once described as the future of her career was collapsing quietly behind the scenes. When the judge entered the courtroom, everyone stood. The case began quickly. Walker versus Walker. The clerk announced. My lawyer stepped forward first. Your Honor. The financial audit ordered by the court has now been completed. The judge nodded. Please summarize the findings. Daniel opened a thick folder and began speaking calmly. The investigation confirmed that a total of $1,980,000 was transferred from marital accounts during the course of the marriage. He paused briefly. Those funds were directed primarily into the company owned by Mrs. Amanda Hayes. The judge turned several pages of the report. Justin sat perfectly still in his chair. Mr. Walker. The judge said. Yes. Your Honor. These transfers were made without the knowledge or consent of your spouse. Justin's voice sounded low. Yes. And some of the funds originated from the minor child's education savings account. Justin hesitated, then nodded. Yes. A quiet silence filled the courtroom. The judge continued reading the report. These actions constitute misuse of marital assets. Justin's lawyer stood. Your Honor. My client acknowledges poor financial judgment but did not intend to violate any law. The judge looked up calmly. Intent does not change the financial consequences. Amanda shifted slightly in her seat. Her attorney leaned forward. Your Honor. Ms. Hayes's company used the funds for legitimate business operations. The judge studied her for several seconds. That may be true. Then she returned to the report. But the funds themselves were not legally available for that purpose. Amanda's posture stiffened. Justin looked down at the table. The judge continued. Additionally, Mr. Walker's employer has submitted a compliance report confirming that his position has been terminated due to violations of corporate financial policy. Emily's hand covered her mouth quietly. Justin didn't react. He already knew. The judge closed the document. This court must now determine the division of marital assets and custody of the minor child. My hands rested calmly on the table. The moment felt strangely quiet after months of tension. The judge spoke again. Based on the financial misconduct confirmed by the investigation, the court orders full financial recovery of the transferred marital assets. Amanda's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor. That amount exceeds the company's current liquidity. The judge looked at him calmly. That is not the court's concern. Amanda's face turned pale. Because the order meant the money would need to be repaid. Nearly $2 million. Whether through her company's assets or Justin's own finances. The judge then turned toward me. Regarding custody of the minor child, Stephen Walker. My chest tightened slightly. The court finds that Mrs. Walker has been the child's primary caregiver throughout the marriage. Justin's head lowered. Therefore, full legal and physical custody is granted to Mrs. Walker. Relief spread through my chest quietly. The judge continued. Mr. Walker will provide financial support according to state guidelines. Justin nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. Because he already understood that the case was over. The judge closed the file. This matter is concluded. The sound of the gavel echoed softly across the courtroom. People began gathering their documents and standing up. Amanda left quickly without looking back. Her attorney followed her toward the hallway. Emily remained seated beside Justin for a moment. Then she touched his arm gently. He didn't respond. Finally, she stood and walked out quietly as well. Justin stayed in his chair. His eyes remained fixed on the empty judge's bench. After a few moments, he stood slowly. Our eyes met across the room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Justin walked toward me. His voice sounded tired. You got everything you wanted. I shook my head slightly. No. Justin looked confused. What do you mean? I didn't want this. Justin glanced around the quiet courtroom. But you made it happen. No. I met his eyes calmly. You made it happen. Justin looked like he wanted to argue. But the words never came. Instead, he turned toward the exit. And for the first time since I had known him, he walked away without saying another word. The courthouse steps were quieter than I expected after the final hearing. People moved past me in a slow stream, lawyers, clerks, couples holding documents that probably meant the end of something important in their lives. But for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Stephen was waiting near the entrance with my sister. The moment he saw me, he ran toward me with the energy only a 7-year-old could have. "Mom?" I knelt down and hugged him tightly. "Hey, sweetheart." He looked up at my face carefully. "Did everything go okay?" I smiled. "Yes." Stephen nodded as if that answer was enough. Children have a simple way of understanding things. He didn't ask about lawyers. He didn't ask about court rulings. All he cared about was whether things were going to be okay. And for the first time in years, I could honestly say they were. Justin walked out of the courthouse a few minutes later. He paused near the top of the steps when he saw Stephen. For a brief moment, the distance between us felt smaller than it had inside the courtroom. Stephen waved. "Bye, Dad." Justin forced a small smile and raised his hand in return. "Bye, buddy." Stephen turned back toward me almost immediately. "Can we get pizza tonight?" I laughed softly. "Yes." Justin watched us for a moment longer. Then he walked down the steps and disappeared into the crowd. I didn't stop him. I didn't call after him. Because some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They simply close. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Stephen went to school every morning. I returned to work and focused on rebuilding the quiet stability our lives needed. The legal process continued behind the scenes, but it no longer controlled my days. Justin's situation unfolded very differently. His company finalized its investigation. The termination became permanent. Without his position, the corporate career he spent years building in Paris disappeared almost overnight. Amanda's company collapsed shortly afterward. When the court froze the accounts tied to the transferred funds, her startup lost its primary financial support. Investors withdrew. Employees left. Within a month, the company closed its doors. There were rumors of further financial investigations. But by then I had stopped paying attention. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the quiet house in Boston where Stephen and I lived. What mattered was the peace that returned after months of tension. One evening, about 2 months after the final hearing, I met my lawyer Daniel outside a small cafe near the courthouse. He smiled when he saw me. "You look different." "In a good way." "Yes." He handed me a small folder. "The last paperwork." I glanced through it briefly. Everything was finalized. The financial recovery plan. The custody agreement. The final legal closure of the marriage. Daniel watched me for a moment. "I've handled a lot of cases like this," he said. "But not many clients stay as calm as you did." I closed the folder. It took a long time to get there. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "There's something I've been curious about." I already knew the question. "When Justin walked into your house that night and said he wanted a divorce." He paused. "Why did you laugh?" For a moment I thought about that night again. Justin standing in the doorway. Amanda beside him. Emily judging me from behind them. All of them expecting tears. All of them expecting me to break. Instead, I had smiled. Not because the moment was funny, but because something inside me finally felt clear. I looked at Daniel and answered honestly. I didn't laugh because it was funny. I paused briefly. I laughed because I knew the waiting was finally over. Daniel nodded slowly. And for the first time in a long time, the past felt like something that no longer belonged to me. Later that night, Stephen and I walked home together from the pizza place near our neighborhood. The air was cool, and the streetlights glowed softly above the sidewalks. Stephen held my hand. "Mom." "Yes. Are you happy?" I looked down at him. Then at the quiet street ahead of us. "Yes," I said. And this time the answer felt completely true. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it simply looks like peace. And sometimes the strongest endings are the quiet ones. If you've ever seen the truth finally catch up with someone who thought they could hide it forever, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Justin deserved what happened to him? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about betrayal, justice, and unexpected strength, make sure to stay here with us. There are many more stories like this coming soon. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.